Hello everybody and welcome to this video in which we are going to be talking about Old Faithful, the GBC. We're getting very retro with the Game Boy Color. This is a console that I've been playing a lot of over the last couple of weeks. It has been one of the things that has been keeping me sane through COVID-19. And I wanted to share with you, I guess, a list of 10 of the games on the console that I think are pretty much forgotten, whether it's just they've never been re-released on virtual consoles, the publisher has gone bankrupt and we don't see the game at all from the license in video games anymore. There's a lot of games on there that I think are still very enjoyable in their own right and deserve to be remembered but kinda aren't. This is a top 10 list, it's not in any particular order though, and do let me know at the end of it what your favourite GBC games were, if you were around and playing the console back in those days, that perhaps other people might have forgotten, because I'd be certainly keen to check them out. I think COVID's going to be going on for a while, so I'm going to be playing a lot more of these retro games in the future. First up we have Alone in the Dark. Alone in the Dark was one of the original horror properties, and on the GBC the developers actually tried to take the essence of the 3D horror game and put it into a console that really wasn't capable of handling 3D. The thing is, they kind of succeeded. While the game looks primitive now and really lacks atmosphere, it has all of the elements that people who were playing Resident Evil back in those days will remember fondly. It's got the 3D environments to explore. Yes, the combat is kind of a 2D thing and it's kind of not that great, but there is the survival element that you need to manage resources quite carefully, make sure you don't run out of bullets, and it has the puzzles, which is the main kind of core of the horror games back in those days. Exploration was very much about puzzle solving, finding the right key to the right door, and it just has it has an X factor that was really enjoyable, and I certainly highly rate it. Not that I think people these days will enjoy it, but if you grew up playing it, then you're going to kind of love it. Next up we have Donald Duck, Goin, Quackers. Now Donald Duck was produced by Ubisoft back when Ubisoft was doing an awful lot of licensed stuff with Disney, and this is a really nice little game. On the GBC, the game uses the same engine as Rayman on the GBC, and it's a very similar kind of themed platformer where you need to explore around. It's got very kind of bright, vibrant colours. It's got all these kinds of bits of loot that you can't quite work out how to reach, and it's the combat's kind of not the focus of it, but yeah, it's got all the personality as well of Donald Duck. So if he gets hit by an enemy, he kind of flips out, and if he gets hit again, then that's the end of a life. It follows the same story as the Nintendo 64 and I think PlayStation 2 Donald Duck Goin, Quackers, where Daisy's been kidnapped and Donald Duck goes on a time-hopping quest to save her. But where those games were kind of Crash Bandicoot 3D clones, this one I think is much better because it has that 2D element is really cool, and Rayman was a great game on the GBC as well. That's the better known one. Donald Duck is a great alternative for people that that want more of the same. Next up we have Heroes of Might and Magic 2, which is a 3DO port, remember 3DO, of a classic strategy RPG thing. And this game has got to be my most played GBC game of all time because it feels so expansive. While it looks quite primitive now, and while the AI is fairly exploitable by strategy game standards, this game has a lot to it. There's an awful lot of different units you can recruit to your party. There are an awful lot of different factions that you can control, and each one has a slightly different playstyle. Some are more focused on ranged, some are more focused on melee, and it just has all the elements of a Heroes of Might and Magic game. The maps are quite large, especially given what the GBC was capable of, and it had a full kind of campaign mode where you'd actually have to play through a number of different maps, and it had a high score thing, so you would get a score based on how high you set the enemy AI, how many resources you had to start with, and the map that you chose, and you would be encouraged to keep replaying to try and get higher scores and stuff. Obviously no online leaderboard back in those days, but it was the kind of game that was always about just one more go, and then just one more campaign, just one more scenario. It just the playability as this thing was off the charts. So yes, it was a special game, and there was full leveling mechanics, and there was just so many different directions and so many different strategies you could play around with. This game really did hook me in, and still does. I start to play it today and I still end up playing it for hours on end. Next up we've got Hexcite. Now Hexcite is a pretty basic looking board game, but what this one has going for it in spades is complexity with its very simple design. So you've got these shapes, and you basically need to use those shapes to fill in parts of the map on the board. And if you fill in entire hexes, which are the purple and green things there, you get a bonus score. It's 1 versus 1. You take a turn, your opponent takes a turn, and the person at the end who has the most points obviously wins. If you've got any shapes left at the end of a game that you can't place, you lose points, so you need to be quite strategic about how you use them. You need to make sure that your opponent doesn't fill in the squares and get the bonus points, and all of this stuff just comes together in a way that is really, it's got all the fundamentals of a good basic board game. And I don't know why Ubisoft hasn't persisted with this one. It hasn't. This was a Ubisoft game again, and it was well designed, and I would like to have seen it go on. I'd love to see kind of a HD version of that today. Next up is a really obscure one, but if you're a fan of dungeon crawlers, then it was pretty compelling for all of its limitations. It's called Towers, Lord Baniff's Desire. I think it's Desire. Lord Baniff's something or other anyway. And it has everything that people who grew up playing the old Dungeons and Dragons SSI games and whatever would recognize. It was grid-based movement, so you'd take a step and it would be a whole square on the map. You would want to explore. There were puzzles all around the place. Combat was in real time rather than turn-based. And you see there, I'm just defeating a very kind of cowardly enemy that was running away from me. But other enemies really did up the difficulty level. And this game even had tiny little bits of FMV stuck into it, which was very low quality FMV. I don't even know what the resolution would be. It'd be like 60 pixels. But it had a level of presentation that was kind of really impressive for its time. And yeah, I think that this is one of those games that people might struggle to really enjoy today. But if you did grow up playing those kind of old games, then old dungeon crawlers, then this was one that would be a bit of a hidden gem if you were to discover it on an emulator today. So next up on this little list we have Wetrix. Now Wetrix is a little bit like Tetris mixed with dam construction. You've got squares that fall down from the sky and you need to arrange them on a playfield. The difference between Tetris, where you needed to build them into nice neat blocks, and Wetrix is, with Wetrix you need to create spaces to drop water once it falls down, and you needed to make sure that it was fully enclosed by the blocks so that it wasn't spilling out of the side of the board. Eventually, of course, the water would spill out and it would end up in game over, because you'd get more and more water in the dams and you would really kind of start to struggle to clear the water out using the kind of fireballs that you saw there, and continue to build up the dams at a rate that allowed them to accumulate more and more water. So that was the basic idea of the puzzle thing, and it's a really addictive one. This game was also on the Nintendo 64, and it was much better on the 64. On the GBC it is a little bit hard to see what you're doing sometimes, and placing blocks can be more challenging than it should have been, simply because the perspective is a little bit wonky. But when we're talking about, you know, Game Boy Color, this was the only console that you had to play on the go, and if you really enjoyed Wetrix like I did and played it a lot on the N64 as well, having this thing to play on the go was a really neat thing as well. So this might have been one of the first times that I bought a game across multiple platforms, so I could play it while I was at home or on the go. I could have it, you know, the big HD version of it on the N64, but when I was out and about I was able to continue to play on. Next up we have a licensed game which admittedly it's not particularly great, but I was a huge fan of Buffy when I was growing up. It was something that I would watch every week without fail, and I went and bought the DVDs afterwards, and I can still put it on today and still enjoy it, although I do think that compared to a lot of other TV, this series has kind of aged. It's still very enjoyable for what it is. There were a lot of Buffy games that were released, most of them were pretty poor. This one is actually kind of playable simply because it is so simple, and it's a brawler. As you can see, you need to beat up vampires and you just kind of move forwards, constantly beating up more vampires. But it has a nice touch whereby you can actually defeat them very early on by knocking them down when they've still got a huge amount of health, but then staking them. So you could, if you were kind of struggling, if you were running out of health yourself, you could go for the Hail Mary and try to get a quick win out of nothing. And that was good fun. It's also quite a nice looking game for a GBA game. The animations are quite clean. And while I'm not going to show you this in the video clip, there is quite lengthy cutscenes which have a lot of the Buffy humour, which again has aged a little more than I might have liked in the years since, but I distinctly remember really enjoying that humour, and now when I play this game today, I can still appreciate that humour for what it was to me back then. This is a very nostalgic brawler. It's not a genre that I'm a huge fan of most of the time, but I did enjoy this one for all of its simplicity. Next up we have a real treat, which is one of the most criminally underappreciated games that was ever released on the Game Boy Color. This game is called Warlocked. Now, Warlocked is basically the GBA's answer to Warcraft, and it is really, really good. It actually works as a simple strategy game. There are only 2 combat units that you can build, which is the warriors or the archers, and the number of buildings that you can build are very simple as well. There's only basic farms and defensive structure and the barracks that you use to build more units. But this game has a couple of neat little tricks to it. Firstly, it has dragon eggs, which are sometimes hidden on the map somewhere. If you find a dragon egg and bring it back to your castle, it hatches to become a very powerful unit indeed, and that's a good way to get a real lead in the battle. And it also has wizards. Now, there are dozens of wizards from memory, and each one has a different ability. Some turn the enemies into snowmen, other ones will heal your units, and there are some kind of stealth wizards as well. You can summon those wizards once you've found them in the game somewhere, and then you can summon them in later levels, and they add a lot of strategic variety to the game. And this game also had multiplayer, which was great. Playing linked up kind of 2-person multiplayer was really good, especially since, again, it had this neat thing where those wizards that you collected in the single player would then become available in multiplayer. If you didn't find the wizard in the single player game, you didn't have it as a resource in multiplayer. So there was that need to play through the single player game in order to build up your resources in multiplayer. And I distinctly remember my brother and I spending a lot of time playing that game just to get our resources together for the Friday night or Saturday, matches, and they would get very furious. It was a very tightly designed little strategy game. The only weakness it had was that the AI was quite poor. It would have been nice to see them continue on with that series. I think there was a lot of potential in it. Next up we have probably the most advanced GBC game that was ever released, Cannon Fodder. When I say advanced, it has a lot of really cool stuff in it. It actually has 3D moments, such as a helicopter that you jump into to start off missions. It has full voice acting. It's not a lot of voice acting. The samples are quite limited and quite low quality because it is GBC. But there was a lot of effort that was put into this thing to really capture the humour and the presentational elements that made the base game, which was on PC, so popular. For anybody who hasn't played Cannon Fodder, it is a very satirical take on war. It's kind of like the Full Metal Jacket, if you will. Well, the Full Metal Jacket wasn't really satirical, but it is that kind of critical game, the game that is quite critical of war, and it finds its way to that through satire. So it's very clever. It's kind of a basic action game, as you can see. You need to maneuver your characters through forests and other environments and shooting enemies. It's difficult, but it's good. Finally, this is probably not the most unknown game, but given that Game & Watch has kind of disappeared off Nintendo's schedule and priority list, I figured that I should drop it in here. There are a couple of Game & Watch compilations that were released on the GBC. This is Game & Watch 3, Game & Watch Collection 3, and it had quite a few of the various Game & Watch games, which had both the original version, which was that black and white Game & Watch LCD display. It kind of emulated that if you wanted to play it that way, or you could play the modern version, which is what you're seeing here, where the developers went to a lot of effort to take the character of the Game & Watch game and the basic gameplay elements of it and modernize it with Mario characters and all that kind of stuff. It's a very simple arcade game collection, and I think that a lot of people today who didn't grow up with Game & Watch will find these things too simple to be particularly enjoyable, but they are incredibly nostalgic if you were like me and you actually had the Game & Watch units when you were growing up and spent a lot of time playing them. having these as collections on the GBC was a lot of good value. Alright, that's enough of this video for me now. I've talked plenty. Again, do let me know your favourite GBC games in the comments if you did grow up playing the console. Otherwise, please do like and subscribe, and please do consider backing me on Patreon, because that will help me do a lot more of this stuff in the future. We will see you at the next video.